very warm welcome to another edition of World Panorama. Here we are getting you your weekly dose of major international news with a perspective. I'm Sana Khan, and straight to the story in focus this week. Pervez Musharraf recently returned to Pakistan after 5 years in exile, determined to face down his challenges in the courtroom and make a sensational return to politics in time for the May 11 election. But his grand plan has turned into a disaster. On Tuesday, where it all started really, election officials barred him from running for a seat in Parliament. By Friday, he was formally arrested, the first time that has happened to any former chief of the Pakistani army, amid claims that he illegally placed senior judges under house arrest during a period of emergency rule that he imposed back in 2007. Now, on Saturday, Musharraf was taken before an anti-terrorism court in Islamabad. This was not supposed to have happened when Musharraf ended his exile and flew back to Pakistan to contest the presidential elections to be held in a few days' time. Now, while the President General was never clear about what he had hoped to accomplish, given that he'd barely registered in the opinion polls, the idea seems to have been that he saw some sort of an opportunistic space in the present divide between the incumbent president and the existing military leadership. Now, instead, the only space that he has found has been the vengeful mood of the judiciary, or so it seems. So what's his future? Was it a big misjudgment on Musharraf's part to return to Pakistan? With his political ambitions taking a serious hit, can the general take control? What about the other two cases that are pending against him? A lot of questions really emerge at this point in time, and to discuss this and more, I welcome Dr. Sreeram Chaulia. He's the Dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs. Thank you so much, Dr. Chaulia, for joining me. First of all, what do you make of these developments? Could General Musharraf have fathomed that this is what's going to unfold when he returns to Pakistan? He wanted to contest the polls, really.
Sana, he has miscalculated often in his career. This is probably the worst blunder he has made. But on the other hand, like all egotistic military rulers, he had this notion that the people need him and that Pakistan needs him, because they believe they're indispensable. So I think it's an error in judgment for sure. He probably regrets it, but being the kind of commando he is, you would expect that he'll come out fighting and use all levers possible. Because there is room for discretion in the executive side of the government. Because the new government will be sworn in, and as your story was just mentioning, it's likely it's going to be a Nawaz Sharif led government.
So you're saying that there is room for him to take some sort of help from the government in order to perhaps soften the trial and even maybe move out of Pakistan, if that's possible?
I don't think he wants to leave. He wants to stay there and prove a point that he didn't make any mistake, and that in fact, he raised Pakistan's stature in the world. That's his belief. But of course, it's a delusion. But what he would want is, I think, use his connections in the military, for sure. His proteges, who are now the current army chief and his 6 or 7 corps commanders. So these people, what the Pakistani media calls influential quarters, they always play a role behind the scenes. So while the judiciary is on a warpath with him, perhaps a little too obsessively and in a very revengeful manner that does not take into consideration various facts that he may have going for him, the only backup for him is the fallback option is to use the executive, because Musharraf works on the notion of arbitrariness and discretion. That is the military's culture. It is not rule of law, it is not following procedure, it is not equality. So whenever they say, chief of army staff or former chief, how can he be touched?
That we saw when he fled the court the other day with his commandos by his side, and that's how Musharraf is, really. But we are talking about, for example, let's say General Kayani. Now, there are also fears, and some reports also say that, if the trial continues, then Musharraf could perhaps, couldn't help but drag other military leaders into this trial that's being conducted. Now, what is the possibility of that really happening? Are there any fears?
Absolutely. I think the general headquarters will be wary of this, because this is now a question of institutional prestige. It's not about an individual like Musharraf. Just as the judiciary and the lawyers are behaving as if it's a question of balancing against the military and creating civilian institutions, the military wants to continue to assert its supremacy behind the scenes. As far as the Pakistani military is concerned, they want to stay behind the scenes and continue to be the kind of eminence grises which will run the show, rather than do overt military coups. And the fate of Musharraf is likely to actually deter future potential coup makers from the army, because they are seeing that this could be a process. So in that sense, what is happening is revolutionary. It is tilting the civil-military balance. And, you know, you never know. History tells us that even in countries like Turkey, Indonesia, Egypt, which have had very, very strong militaries, eventually the civilians gain greater control. So what we need to see now is this the first step towards a long-term structural democratization of Pakistan? Because the elections are happening, there is turnover of power, that's good. You know, it's for the first time it's happening in 5 years. But then the point is, elections alone do not create democratization. Democratization comes from democratizing and, you know, decentralizing institutional power and creating checks and balances. Right now, GHQ, Rawalpindi is still seen as the most powerful institution in the country. And I think Musharraf's fall from grace and in a very humiliating way will hopefully move the process forward towards ultimate democratization.
If in 2 lines, I'd like you to just tell me that what lies ahead for Pakistan, and right now seems it's very uncertain, you know, uncertainty and fear. Do you think what's happening with General Musharraf is going to have any impact on the polls that are due to take place? Very quickly.
Probably not, because there is a belief that Imran Khan's party is now being backed by the military to try and weaken Nawaz Sharif's claim to power and so on. But these have always existed. I think we are going to see a deeper polarization in Pakistani society. One thing is for clear, it will be between different versions of democracy that people want. Nobody wants the military back, and the rejection of Musharraf by Pakistani society is absolute, and there is no way for him to make a comeback. The only way he is going to rely on these shadowy and unconstitutional authorities to continue to exert his influence.
So basically, one can hope that some sort of positive could even come out of what's happening with General Musharraf. Perhaps structural democratization, as you mentioned, could take place, and things could be moving in the right direction. Finally, thank you, Dr. Chaulia, for joining me on World Panorama this week. We'll be back next week with more world news. You can join us on Facebook and Twitter in the meantime for the latest updates. Goodbye, and thanks for watching.